Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's event, Mindfulness, Resilience, and Recovery in Today's World. My name is Alicia Abad, and I've been involved with Newton-Wellesley Hospital for over 5 years as Community Chair of the Substance Use Services Council. Tonight's program is sponsored by the Newton-Wellesley Hospital Community Collaborative and hosted by the Substance Use Services Council. The collaborative was established in 2017 to serve residents of Natick, Needham, Newton, Waltham, Wellesley, and Weston. It integrates Newton-Wellesley Hospital more deeply into the local community, and it's a core part of the hospital's mission to enhance health and wellness. Comprised of 8 councils, it focuses on unmet, poorly funded, or unreimbursed needs through oversight and support of clinical services and educational programs. Objectives of the councils embrace education, advocacy, philanthropy, and targeted programming. The community collaborative is philanthropy-driven, and through the generosity of supporters, we are able to provide and expand our wide range of services and offerings. If you'd like to learn more, get involved, or offer support to us, please use any of the ways that you see on this slide. I'm really excited for tonight's event. And now I'd like to turn it over to our moderator and the hospital champion for substance use services, Dr. Katrina Armstrong.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight for our seminar on mindfulness, resilience, and recovery in today's world. My name is Katrina Armstrong, and I am the Associate Director and co-founder of Substance Use Services at Newton-Wellesley Hospital and also on infectious disease staff here. I am really excited to introduce our host tonight, our speaker, and I will tell you a little bit about Dr. Chris Willard. Before I do that, I'd like to remind the audience about using the Q&A feature for questions, and you can do this throughout the program. The questions will be addressed at the conclusion of the presentation, which will end at around 7:45. I found out about Chris Willard a couple of years ago through friends and colleagues, and have been learning so much about his important work. And I can't say enough about how excited I am to have him join us tonight. Chris Willard is a clinical psychologist and prolific and sought after speaker who has presented in 30 countries, including 2+ TEDx events. He has 20 books such as Alpha Breaths, Growing Up Mindful, and these books showcase his expertise in mindfulness and meditation. As a Harvard Medical School faculty member, Chris specializes in anxiety, depression, and stress-related disorders, extending his impact to schools and organizations, implementing mindfulness-based programs for enhanced emotional regulation and resilience. He's recognized in major publications, and he continues to be a leading voice in the transforming lives through mindfulness and improving overall well-being globally. Tonight, we are privileged to have Chris join us, sharing expert insight and clinical insight and thoughts, providing practical tools for resilience through mindfulness, positive psychology, and neuroscience in challenging times. And now I'd like to turn it over to Chris. Thank you.
Oh, you think 4 years almost since the pandemic? I still have myself on mute. So I have a mug that says you're still on mute. But anyway, here I am. It's a real honor to be here. I just want to thank everyone from Newton-Wellesley MGH for doing all the hard work behind the scenes. I always often notice that when there's more work that happens behind the scenes, it makes things in front of the scenes go very smoothly. So there's a lot of hard work in doing this, and it sounds like this whole series, which is wonderful. It's also fun to be here. I'm like literally about 3 blocks right now from Newton-Wellesley Hospital, and yet we are not there in person. I grew up in Newton. My office is in Wellesley. Half my friends growing up were born there, but I know we're also kind of part of this larger community and system and everything too. So it's an honor to be here speaking about mindfulness. And what I really want to leave you with are just some practical ways that you can integrate this stuff into your life, because it sounds so kind of airy-fairy and out there for some of us, but it can actually be such a practical tool, and one that's been so important to me, and transformed the lives of people around the world for centuries, millennia even. And we're finding this incredible science behind it all, in more recent years with some colleagues that some of us know too. So let's begin by just taking a moment to settle in. I'm going to share a practice that I kind of came up with, adapted a couple years ago. It's just a simple acronym. I call it the mindful seat. We're just going to become aware of noticing senses and sensations, emotions, I like to say actions, and thoughts. So we can just maybe for 3 or 4 minutes find a comfortable posture, just sitting upright. If you feel comfortable, you can let your eyes close. That's really at your comfort level. We'll begin by tuning into our 5 senses. At first, maybe just noticing sounds around us. Maybe that's distant sounds outside. Maybe it's nearby sounds, the heater in the room, the creaking of our chair. Sound of our breath outside of our body and inside our body as well. Stomach growling, any other sounds you're aware of inside your body. And as you breathe, you might just be aware of any sense that you can be aware of, the smell of dinner cooking in the background, or your shampoo or soap. Pleasant and unpleasant scents and smells. Lingering taste in your mouth, the taste of the air, taste of your last meal. And whether your eyes are open or closed, just noticing what you see, shapes, shadows. And lastly, sensations, your legs against the chair, texture of the clothing against your skin, temperature of the air. And then shifting away from our senses, noticing what emotions are here right now. Excitement or frustration. Curiosity or boredom. Joy or sorrow, just welcoming, greeting all those emotions like guests from beyond, as the poem says, watching those emotions visit and depart. And then turning to A for actions. And by that, I really mean urges, impulses. What do you feel like doing? Click this tab off and start shopping for shoes. Take a sip of water, stretch, just noticing urges. Seeing if you can feel them in your body, that impulse, that urge. And just stay with it as it rises and eventually does pass. And then lastly, what thoughts are here? This is great, this is terrible. What's for dinner? What are the kids screaming about? Just noticing whatever thoughts, welcoming them all as they rise and pass. And then stepping out of this practice, if you need to flutter your eyes open, wiggle your toes a little bit. Before you come back to the screen, maybe just looking beyond the screen, looking around the room. We spend so much time online, sadly, since the pandemic, right? We get that Zoom doom, Zoom gloom. I heard someone talk about it as just, I learned actually when we spend time online, we actually stress ourselves out more. Our posture is bad, our breath gets tightened up. Just lean back. Someone said 20, 20, 20. Just every 20 minutes you're working on the computer, take about 20 seconds to look about 20 feet in the distance. The corners of the room or what's outside. Something beautiful in the room. And then just bring your eyes back to the screen. So that's all it is. You might notice you feel a bit different. You might notice you feel the same. You might not notice anything at all. You might, what we're doing is just welcoming what's happening in our experience. And we start with our senses. I like to start with our senses because our thoughts are always racing to the future or back to the past, regretting things. And our senses just bring us right into the moment. Right? And we can just keep bringing ourselves back. And that's a lot of what this mindfulness thing is about. And I'll get into some more definitions, but hopefully you got something out of that practice. And part of what we're noticing too is that things rise and pass. Sensations appear and disappear. Emotions, they visit, then they depart, right? Our, urges, right? When we're talking about recovery and substance abuse, it's been key for me just watching those urges rise and then pass. And when we don't give into those urges, whatever it is, whether it's cut someone off in traffic or scratch that itch or, check our email or social media or take that drink or that drug or thing that's not so healthy, every time we don't do that, we actually build new connections, new pathways in our brain through what's called neuroplasticity that makes it more likely we'll go down that path next time we feel that urge. And we also notice our thoughts. Oh, my thoughts are just thoughts. They're not real. That's part of this too. This idea of not believing our thoughts. Very powerful for me over time. So I had a lovely introduction that made me sound more interesting than I am. But just to tell you about myself and mindfulness, it's so popular now. Never heard that word growing up. And yet I like to share the story of sort of how I understand mindfulness in my first experiences, because if it feels new to you, it's probably not. You've probably experienced this before. So as I said, look, I grew up in Newton. As a kid, I'd go to Drumlin Farm. I go to Drumlin Farm camp every summer. And at Drumlin Farm camp, when I was a kid, the counselors would say, we're going to go into the red pine forest and we're going to walk as silently as we can in the forest. I want you to walk like an Indian, which we really don't say anymore, right? Maybe we say walk like a ninja or something like that. Don't make a sound at all. And many years later, I took a mindfulness course and we did mindful walking, which is one of my favorite ways to practice mindfulness. And I thought back to being at Drumlin Farm Camp, 6, 7 years old, and thinking, if you've ever tried to walk as silently as possible, you're not thinking about the future. You're not thinking about the past. You're just focused on each individual footstep. You're focused on the texture of the forest floor or the creaky, floor underneath you. And you're really in the moment in your body and with your surroundings. Because when I took that mindfulness course when I was 20 something, they said, we're going to do mindful walking, focus on every footstep, notice the texture of the ground, right? Notice each movement of each muscle. And that was a lot like that walk silently, but that's just what they did, right? And then at camp, they'd say, we're going to sit down in the forest. We're going to notice all the sounds around us in the silence. 7 years old, we're not going to hear anything, right? And then sure enough, we hear the cars on Route 146 and we hear the trees whispering in the distance, things like that. And suddenly getting quiet, start to notice things around us. And I took a mindfulness course later and we did mindful listening, and oh my gosh, that was really a mindful listening practice. And I actually get really bored if I try to focus on my breath. It's boring, sorry, right? But what I love to do as an anchor for attention is just notice the sounds around me. that's really the anchor for my practice, even years later. And as I realize now, I'm a parent. I've got a 5-year-old, a 9-year-old. I'm a therapist. I was a teacher in the past. I was like, I think those counselors at Drumlin, they're probably just trying to get us kids to shut up, right? Pretty good, right? Way of doing it. But it did actually, that was maybe part of their motivation, not the whole thing. I don't want to be totally cynical. But that actually planted those seeds in me of what was some moments of peace. And, other moments, like watching clouds disappear at actually White Pond in Concord with my dad, watching clouds disappear in the sky. And then, went through school, went to college, had a really hard time in college, depression, anxiety, huge substance abuse issue, IV heroin use, opiates, stuff like that, just total mess. Took some time off to, my parents said, well, Chris is finding himself, or, getting my shit together, right? However you want to put that. And during that time, a close friend of the family taught a mindfulness course, and I went and I was like, oh, this is really cool. And then I was really struggling, though, still through that time, those few years, and kind of fell apart again. And my parents actually didn't know what to do with me. They dragged me on a retreat. This is 1999, maybe, with someone named Thich Nhat Hanh, this amazing Vietnamese monk who recently passed. But he talked about the miracle of mindfulness and bringing this mindful attention to breathing, to walking, to thinking, to eating, to everything we do. And my life was like transformed. And I felt happy, and I felt inspired, and I felt creative, and I felt I could focus again. And I realized actually all the interconnection in my life. I realized I wanted to be sober, and I've been sober now I had a couple bumps in the road after that, but I've been sober now for more than 22 years. And it's been transformative. Mindfulness as a big part of that. And so to me, it's a huge part of my recovery journey. Those that are interested in 12 steps, right? It's part of the 12 steps. Those that are interested in just other ways of finding sobriety or using less or recovering from anything, whether it's trauma, whether it's depression, whether it's anxiety, whether it's substances, eating issues, all these things that we humans struggle with. What I found is that I think we used to believe that people needed to, find religion. What I believe is that people need to find meaning. Right? Whether it's arts, whether it's writing, whether it's music, whether it's relationships, whether it's our calling and our work, whether it's running, which is how I got connected sort of backdoor through Boston Bulldogs to Katerina and some other folks here, and my friend and former therapist and now colleague, Coach Mike Ferrullo, who started the Bulldogs, right? Finding running, finding exercise, finding something meaningful in our lives is what brings us happiness, but more than that, it's what brings us meaning, and that brings us, I think, recovery from so many things. So what's amazing about mindfulness is all that stuff. That's me. And so I want to talk a bit more about, where this is really powerful and why it matters, I think, also to start with ourselves. I know there's all that sort of like, start with yourself, set an example, peace starts with you. And I sort of many years kind of rolled my eyes, and yet realizing actually a few years ago, I started reading about contagions, emotional contagions, and how they relate to mindfulness. And so what's amazing is that if you're a parent and just you, not even your spouse or your ex, practices mindfulness, there's better communication in the home. Kids are happier, fewer accidents in the home, things like that. If you're an educator or teacher, if just you practice mindfulness, don't even teach this to the kids. The kids are performing better, they're showing up to school more, they're happier, they're behaving better in school. I know there's some doctors in the crowd, doctors who practice mindfulness, right? Getting better results, more patient trust, patients following their advice, getting sued less often when you learn how to practice compassion in a study I read many years ago. I think it was even malpractice companies were trying to get doctors to learn mindfulness and compassion, because it actually reduced malpractice suits against people. Therapists, that's my day job, people getting better faster because they feel more connected, right? The number one outcome measure in therapy, it's not whether you're doing mindfulness, it's not whether you're doing CBT or DBT or psychoanalysis, it's the quality of the relationship. Well, that's based on the presence of the therapist. Am I really with you? Right? That's mindfulness. right? People living together, actually seeing that mindfulness, when, of course, they do all these poor experiments on college students, but these college students, right, they'd be practicing mindfulness for 1 week on and 1 week off. The week that they were practicing, their roommates were happier. The roommates didn't know that they were doing mindfulness. Their friends back home were happier. Their boyfriends and girlfriends were happier. Right? It has this kind of contagious thing. People in partnerships and couples getting along better when one's practicing mindfulness, compromising more trust, all these amazing things. So it does start with us. It really does. I saw this meme online that says, never in the history of calming down has anyone ever calmed down by being told to calm down, right? I've tried this as a therapist, I've tried it as a parent, I tried it when I was a teacher, right? What's amazing about mindfulness is that what happens is when we calm our nervous system with mindfulness or with running or with exercise or diet or getting sleep or caring for our stress, right? What happens is actually our nervous systems, they start to communicate with other people and they signal to other people, it's safe for you to calm down. I'm a safe person. And they start to settle down. So my work with families and kids and my work with schools, right? The number one thing I teach is not teach this to the kids, it's practice this yourself, because that's where it actually starts to make a difference. Right? Again, talking with schools and parents, like, how do we get more mindful kids, right? Fix the kids. It's like, well, if you want stressed out, miserable kids, it's easy. You surround them with stressed out, miserable adults. If you want mindful, compassionate kids, you surround them with mindful and compassionate adults. That's how we do it, right? It starts with us. Mirror neurons, interpersonal neurobiology, kind of a fancy sounding thing that Dan Siegel talks about. It's just like how we feel is contagious. We know that when we walk into our homes and see our family, or when we walk into work, do we bring the traffic with us or do we let it go at the door? In fact, one of my clients who I finished with a few years ago, I remember asking him what was the most helpful thing in our work together. And he said, he's this really high stress guy with some really challenging kids. And he said, the best thing I learned was, like you said, when I get home, like driving traffic in my Audi down 95, right? Blasting music, cutting everyone off. I pull into the driveway and he said, stop and just take 3 breaths in your car. And then walk into the house. And when I do that, the family is different. I'm different, right? Everything just goes better if I take those 3 breaths in my driveway. And I was like, I'm sorry you spent years in therapy just for that one piece of advice, but I guess you got something out of it. But it is like, the more we take care of ourselves, it does ripple out, impact the people around us. So what is this mindfulness thing? There's a billion definitions out there. I like to say it's got these 3 parts. It's got this first part about paying attention. And we tell people to pay attention. We tell ourselves to pay attention, right? How do we train our attention? We wish we could pay attention. We're also so distracted, right? Half of us are probably also distracted in this moment. And so we're teaching ourselves how to pay attention. We're growing actually the attention part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, when we do this. And I had a friend talk about, actually, mindfulness is like single tasking rather than multitasking. And so what we're doing is we're actually slowing down and single tasking. And a lot of us think we can multitask. And I learned actually recently that only less than 0.5% of the population can actually multitask. And sorry to alienate half the group here, but the news is that 0.5% that can multitask, it's all women, almost exclusively, which doesn't surprise me, knowing amazing women in my life, including my wife. But single tasking, little practice I like to do for single tasking to demonstrate, you can just take a moment, just put a finger in the center of your forehead like this. We're not on video. You can let go of self-consciousness, right? And just notice, right? What does your finger feel like against your forehead? And also, what does your forehead feel like against your finger? Temperature of your finger, temperature of your forehead. Texture of your forehead. texture of your finger. Moisture of the oils from your finger. Moisture of your forehead. Noticing the pressure and maybe even feeling your pulse in there, maybe not. As well as thoughts, doubts, what's this guy telling us to do? And you can just set those aside for one more moment. Aware of the sensations, and then you can just bring your finger back down. But this is a way that when I'm feeling like I'm going about 50 directions at once, which is frequent in my life. You hear my bio, I travel, I work, I write, I consult, I try to be a dad, I try to cook dinner, right? This little practice just helps me every so often. How's my finger feel? How's the forehead feel? Single tasking, narrowing it down, just doing. Actually, I have a friend who's going to do a day at a time. He's going to do a day of mindfulness in this little town in Finland, and he changed it. He just changed it to do one thing at a time day, which I thought was a totally awesome idea to rebrand the mindfulness, right? The present moment. What's so great about the present moment? All these books, The Power of Now, Be in the Moment, blah, blah, blah. It's like, it took me a while, even in practicing mindfulness, 20 some years now. What is so great about the present? Well, when we're doing nothing, we often do tend to go to the future. We're worrying, horror stories. Oh, this talk is going so terribly. They're never going to invite me back. I'm going to ruin my professional reputation. I'm never going to get a referral again. They're probably going to, show up with pitchforks to, just a few blocks away from Newton-Wellesley, tell me what a terrible job I'm doing. Thousands of people will hear mindfulness is terrible, right? We tell ourselves these horror stories about the future. Evolutionarily, we do that. It makes sense, right, to plan for the worst, but our world actually is pretty safe. And so we try to just stay in the present. It's actually often better. We feel better about ourselves, right? Same with going to the past. Oh, why did I say this thing? I feel so stupid. Why did that happen? Why did that happen to me, right? If those experienced a trauma, right? The past, we're often unhappy, but getting into the present, we're happier. Researchers, Matt Killingsworth and Gilbert at Harvard, they do this study, text people on their phone. You say, what are you doing? How present are you right now? And how happy are you? And what they found was that what you're doing isn't actually what makes you happy. It's how present you are, how focused you are on what you're doing. That's why in mindfulness, they say, when you're just doing the dishes, just do the dishes, right? I still kind of hate doing the dishes, right? But when we're focused on what we're doing, we're happier. The research backs that up, twice as happy, right? So being in the moment like that, it's hard with the dishes, but in the shower, maybe that's a little better for me. It's like, and our senses are there, right? I can smell the soap, I can see the steam, I can, feel the water, I can hear the water, right? It's a great, actually, so many people say I get my best thinking done in the shower. It's probably because it's so sensory. But that's how to be in the moment, be with all 5 of your senses in the moment. When they asked people also, how focused are you, how present you are, what they found was actually that our minds go to the past and the future, and to comparing ourselves to others, that usually doesn't go well either. But they found that your mind wanders a lot of the time. People usually, when I ask, they're like 80% of the time, it's not that bad. It's like 48% of the time your mind wanders, right? Which means I need to repeat that. Half of you missed it. Your mind wanders like half the time, but you can train it to be in the present with mindfulness, with the seat practice, or with just noticing sounds around us, or feeling our feet on the ground, pressing our forehead, brings us into the present. We're happier. Mind wanders a little bit less, and we build that muscle, because actually it does change our brain according to the research as well. And then we have this non-judgment thing, which I find tough, right? But it's not judging our experience, it's also learning to not judge ourselves. If you ask Americans who their worst enemy is, surprising no one, the answer, myself, right? Not just me, all of us, we all got that critical voice. You're such an idiot, what's the wrong with you? You're the worst parent, you're the worst worker, you're the worst driver, you're so stupid. We've all got that critical voice. And what I think has been so empowering for me about mindfulness is like, there's that other bumper sticker that says, don't believe everything you think. And I always like, okay, yeah, hippie bumper sticker. But what mindfulness has helped me do is not believe it all. It's like, yeah, sometimes I tell myself, oh, great, you're a terrible parent or you're not good at this. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but even if I just introduce doubt, maybe it's not true that I'm the worst parent in the world. Maybe I'm the second worst parent in the world, right? Not believing all my thoughts is such a relief. That terrible thing might happen, but it might not, right? Maybe there's 5 other reasons why, my friend didn't call me back. It's not just, that they hate me, right? Maybe they hate me. Maybe the tea is broken again. Maybe they're in traffic. Maybe they forgot. Maybe they're busy eating dinner. Maybe they're having an emergency. Maybe they, are mad, think I'm mad at them, right? It's, hey, what if I don't believe all my thoughts or introduce some other things in there? So mindfulness, we put that together. It's this paying attention to the here and now with acceptance and non-judgment. And it's accepting ourselves, not judging ourselves, not believing that critical voice that we all have quite so much is really empowering. And it's, it's not also, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, right? I showed this to some teenagers once, and this kid said, "Oh, Dr. Willard, I get it. If the human beings thinking about all that stuff, like, they're about to step in the dog shit." And I was like, you're right. Like, mindfulness isn't just the sunshine and the trees and the beauty. It's also noticing where the real dangers are. But when we get stressed, we don't notice. We assume the worst. We miss out on, the actual dangers, and we make up horror stories about the future. We miss out on things. So mindfulness is seeing it all. It's seeing the beauty in the world, and it's seeing the dog poop too, right? It's really seeing all of it. But we know that stress makes everything worse. It makes our body health worse. It makes our perspective change. It impacts our relationships. We all know that. And so I'll do a little practice with you. I'll invite you to start just holding your hands up like this. And then I'll invite you to squeeze your hands tightly like this. Just make really tight fists. And notice how this feels in your body, with your breath, with your mind. What are the emotions? What's happening here? And then just let go. Notice how nice it is to let go. And then I feel like you can just kind of crumble over in your seat like this, which, I mean, that's probably how you feel Wednesday night anyway. How's your body feel now? Your breath? Do you feel awake, asleep? And then just sitting up straight, not too tight, not too loose, just palms up like this. How's your body, your breath, your mind? And then you can just put one hand on the other and just rest these both over your heart for a moment. Feel that gentle warmth and touch. What's this experience like? Is this familiar? And then you can either hold your hands like this or just put your hands back down. But what I'm inviting us to explore here are different ways that we respond to stress. Traumatic stress that some of us have experienced, right? And it's still being experienced all over the world and every day. Traumatic stress that we've witnessed, that we've heard about, if we're doctors, if we're therapists, right? And even if it's just the regular stress of traffic, of work, of being a parent, of having a job, of, managing mental health issues, managing someone else's mental health issues or substance, right? All this stuff, it stresses us out. And we go into a few responses from nature. We have this, fight or flight. Let me fight this, right? Or flee it. It's like we're wired from our ancestors who were trying to run away from, saber-toothed tigers chasing them. That's the stress response. Like, we think everything is a tiger chasing us, right? Tiger's coming, I'm gonna fight it if I'm brave or stupid, right? Or I'm gonna run away from it if I'm fast, right? Or maybe instead of those, I get tired of running and fighting, right? And I just kind of like give up like this, right? Play dead, hide, become camouflage, because actually predators can't see objects that are still. They actually only see movement. Play dead. And that's what we call like the freeze or faint response, This one. Freeze or forget it, or freeze or different F word, F it kind of response, just giving up. And what happens is that over time, fight turns into like those of us that have anger problems, right? Whether it's anger problems in the world or anger problems just in traffic, right? Quietly in the car, maybe online, right? Or it turns into to flee, right? Fight or flee, run away. Well, running away actually is not a great way to deal with problems. It actually reinforces anxiety. So fleeing leads to more anxiety, struggles with panic, anxiety, things like that. We kind of freeze, dissociative trauma response, or just kind of say, F it, forget it, give up. Over time, that actually turns into depression under stress. I just can't handle this anymore, low energy, or F it, right? I'm just going to go get high or buy this or drink that or do, you know, those behaviors that just make me not feel anything, because F it, basically. These are natural responses to stress, and they also change our brains, and they change our bodies, and they change our relationships. And when I do longer talks, I get deeper into the neuroscience of it, but they shut down our ability to think clearly. We start to assume the worst. Assuming the worst about the future, that's anxiety. And then, of course, we'd want to avoid the future or hide and shrink from it, or you know, do those distracting addictions that many folks fall into, right? To blunt the impact of what we're feeling, right? Or we have, you know, a negative view of the past or ourselves, and that turns into depression, feeling bad about ourselves. And the bad news is, over time, this wires our brains. It's called neuroplasticity. Our brains then become depressed all the time, anxious all the time, addicted to things all the time, dissociated all the time. Or we can go into different ways of being, like this and this, which researchers talk about as a stress response. Also, this is what we can call attend and befriend, or we can also think of these as mindfulness and compassion. And we're not, you know, shutting down when we're like this, right? We're opening up our brains and our hearts like this and like this, to ourselves and to others, right? Our breath isn't all over the place. Our muscles aren't clenched. In fact, they're relaxed. Our digestive system is working. We're actually craving, when we're stressed, we actually, because we're getting ready to fight or flee, we crave like sugar and fat and salt, carbs, things like that. But you're not craving kale when you're stressed out. I mean, we're never craving kale, right? Maybe a few people, we got some medical people here, right? Probably crave kale. But right, when we're like this, right, we stress eat, right? When we're like this, not craving kale, but we have what we call rest and digest. Our bodies are working. We're able to socialize. Not everyone and everything looks like a threat. Things feel safe. I can handle the future. It's scary, but I got this in a different way. You know, just thinking, you know, kind of one day at a time, right? I can manage this. I can keep it in the day. I can keep moving forward. That's part of how mindfulness was so helpful to me, is I felt more like this, not like always running away all the time. So we rewire our brains, and Sarah Lazar, who's at MGH, by the way, at the lab, she scanned the brains of people who practice mindfulness to see actually those parts of the brain with focus, those parts of the brain with emotion regulation, that those are actually getting a little bit bigger in gray matter when we practice mindfulness over time. And so we're transforming our brains for the better when we practice mindfulness and compassion or self-compassion. And so many ways to do this. We've explored a few. We did the mindful seat. We did this thing. We explored some others. I want to touch on breathing, and I also have like so little time left. You know, I mentioned, you know, also like the idea of mindful movement, right? Mindful walking, that these are practices, mindful eating. These are healthy practices, ways that we can bring mindfulness to our bodies. And even actually, one of the things I love about, you know, Bulldogs, where I know some folks are coming in from, like, we know that even moderate physical exercise, it's as good as many antidepressants for mild to moderate depression and anxiety. It also boosts focus, you know, that some of us struggle with attention, right? So it's amazing actually just getting even little bits of exercise. Or eating right makes a difference. Mindful eating is a really powerful practice. But learning how to regulate our breath is actually a really beautiful thing that we can learn how to do. And when we, there's a slide on, oh my gosh, there's a slide on eating, breathing. I'm like the fastest talking mindfulness teacher ever. I just want to put that, I'm from Boston, right? We talk fast here. When we regulate our breath, we regulate our body. That makes sense, right? That regulates our nervous system. Think of the nervous system as being the whole body, right? It's the brain is really in our whole body. It's why we say, right, we recover first from our body, or the body, trauma and mental health lives in the body, right? The brain's the biggest part of the nervous system, right? Then we're regulating our attention, our impulses, and our emotions. So learning how to regulate our breath. I learned recently we've got actually different nerve endings in the top and bottom of our lungs. So if you breathe short and fast, give yourself a panic attack. I don't recommend it, right? But it's like, it sends your body into fight or flight. It's like pulling the fire alarm. If you breathe slow and deep, 5-6 full breath cycles in a minute, it hits the nerve endings in the bottom of our lungs and it says, you're safe, you can focus, your brain can now do critical thinking, make good decisions, manage your impulses in a really different way by learning to regulate our breath. So I used to work in IT during my time off finding myself 20 some years ago. The tech support people you call, I don't know why there's balloons going off. The tech support, there's something wrong with or some setting I haven't fixed on my Zoom. People call up, right? My internet's not working, right? What do they always say? Restart your computer. Fixes 90% of the problems if you need to get your in-laws off your back. We humans, our nervous system reset button is in the bottom of our lungs. You breathe deeply, slowly you hit that reset button in the bottom of your lungs. Your nervous system resets, your brain is focused, your body is relaxed, you're ready to handle other people, challenging situations now in a really different way. So it's finding breath regulation practices that might work for you. Maybe that's counting. Again, many athletes are using mindfulness these days they call it mental fitness, mental resilience, mental toughness training. I have to fix the Zoom setting. Breathing in, counting up to 7. And breathing back out to 11. It really slows the breath down, gets into a regulated rhythm in a really different way. Another one I learned from Fleet Mall, he's an interesting dude. He was in prison for drug dealing for like 20 some years and then became a mindfulness teacher after that, does corporate mindfulness trainings and stuff. But he talks about it. This is something we do every day without realizing it, just going like this. It's really hard to not breathe deeply and slowly if you're going like this. So when we walk into that party, or if we're socially anxious, or that meeting or something, right, doing this actually really does stretch out what's called our vagus nerve. Hard to not breathe deeply and slowly, and settles things down. I give this one to teenagers a lot as a favorite. And with little kids, I know I mentioned the introduction. I wrote an alphabet book for kids, and we have things like the alligator breath, breathing in and breathing out, or the butterfly breath, breathing in, fluttering your wings, and breathing back out for B, or C is the hot chocolate breath, a good one for the winter. Breathe in, smelling the hot chocolate, blow out, cooling off. That these are ways that we can learn how to practice regulating our breath with really all ages. So I've got a lot more slides, a lot more thoughts than I'm ever going to get to in the course of this slideshow. But I do just want to share, there's ways we can bring mindfulness to our bodies. And I wanted to emphasize that in particular when I'm talking in a hospital setting and with a lot of people that are caring a lot for their bodies. That's the foundation in some ways. And yet we can also bring mindfulness to our minds, to clear seeing through different practices as well. Maybe that's visualizations that we do. That can be a powerful one. Just imagine sort of setting our thoughts on the cloud and watching it drift away. Practices like that. Other practices are powerful too. Practices of gratitude, which is a huge, important part of recovery from depression, from anxiety, from substances, is a gratitude practice. And I do want to start by saying that gratitude gets a very bad rap. I think it's when we practice it wrong, I think there are fair accusations of what we call toxic positivity, of pretending everything's good when it's not. When we practice gratitude in the correct way, we're acknowledging that things are tough, but also looking for where there are some positives. So actually the way I practice, for example, with my family is we call it roses and thorns, like a few roses, a few positive things, one negative thing, because we don't want to pretend everything's good when it's not. And then one bud of something that we're looking forward to the next day. It actually became a ritual during the pandemic to practice that way as a family, because I was home all the time for bedtime, and we got to start practicing. And my kids they're like, let's do 100 roses. I don't want to go to bed. It's like, well, let's do like 3 or 4. But we actually, just as humans in general, we're wired with what's called the negativity bias. We tend to think the worst. We should take in 4 times as much negative as positive information. So actually, to truly see clearly, to be mindful, we have to see the dog shit and we have to see the rainbows and the sunshine. And so gratitude, we actually have to look for 3 or 4 good things and acknowledge the one bad thing to actually just see clearly. So it's not some, hippy dippy Pollyanna practice. It's actually really important to practice with others. I've got a text thread, Gratitude Boys text thread with friends that we just check in a few times a week. We do this as a family. In the workplace, I think it's so important to spend time talking about what's going well at work, not just like, oh, this isn't going well and that's not going well. Like, where can we learn from our successes, as well as our challenges and failures? So we know that there's all kinds of health benefits as well. And the more stressed we are, the more that negativity bias, that seeing the worst increases, the worst in people, the worst in ourselves, the worst in the world. Call it the cognitive triad of doom, I think, that makes us depressed and anxious. So these kinds of practices, and I just want to close, I know we've got questions, but I want to close with what we call a self-compassion practice that I also think, you can see I brought way too many slides, that I find to be very powerful in my own life. And so I'll invite you now just to take a moment, well, maybe take 3 or 4 minutes with this. Close your eyes if that feels all right to you. Maybe shrug your shoulders, take a breath, let your shoulders drop. And just bring to mind a challenging moment recently. Small moment though, a little mistake. You ate too much, you ran late for work, you snapped at your spouse, blew a deadline. A whoopsie. But a time that critical voice was active. Why'd you do that? What's the matter with you? And just notice that critical voice, how harsh it is, the words, the tone. And just invite that voice to step back and invite in maybe a more compassionate voice. Can still be firm, but that just validates this experience. Ah, this sucks. This is hard. Mistakes feel bad. Whatever saltier language you want to use that feels authentic. I really want to find a voice that feels authentic to you. Throw some F-bombs in there if you need to. This stinks. And then take a moment and just put a hand over your heart, or even give yourself a hug again where cameras are off, no one's looking. Feel that gentle warmth and pressure. And then some words just reminding yourself that you're not alone. Everybody makes mistakes. No one's perfect. Got 109 screw ups in the crowd tonight. I'm not alone. The kind of words you'd maybe say to a friend or to a kid. Hey, we all make mistakes sometimes. We all have our days. What are the words, the tone that you would use with a friend? Offer those to yourself. Or maybe offer them to the group too. And then just some words of kindness, right? May I let this go? May I forgive myself? You can be firm too. May I learn from this? May I just do better next time? Pick myself up. Again, like you'd offer a friend, or even just sending that wish out to everybody here tonight. May we all be a bit kinder to ourselves. If it feels easier to send it to others, which for a lot of us it does, you can try that. And seeing if you can receive those kind wishes, though, too, from the rest of the group. Open to them a bit. And then you can just set your hands back down. Open your eyes again. And I'll just kind of finish with a reminder that this doesn't have to be big stuff. You can take a minute here, a minute there, right? When you pull into the driveway, when you're waiting for the elevator at the office, right? When you're waiting for the meeting to start, right? You can take a few breaths, you can notice the sounds, you can feel the sensations in your feet, right? Or bring more mindfulness to the things that you do. This is another meme I saw. It says there's this guy at the coffee shop sitting at a table, not on his phone, not on a laptop, just drinking his coffee like a psychopath, right? There's the one guy at the Dunkies, right? We know that old guy. But for you too, right? Take a moment. Just first 3 sips of your coffee, feel it, taste it, smell it, right? Enjoy it. And then pick up your phone, then pick up, open up your email, right? Do what you got to do, but take that moment, give yourself that moment, see if your day doesn't go differently. So I want to close there. I want to thank you all again for your presence, for your awareness, for the amazing work that so many people here are doing. It's an honor to be part of this series at my local hospital a couple blocks away. It's an honor in general to be among friends and esteemed colleagues, and just the amazing connections that we have, through my hard time when I was young, my friend Mike, who helped me out back then, who connected me with other people, who connected me with Katharina and all these other kind of people who help us along the way. Just so much gratitude. That's why I'm here, and those connections that can keep us alive and recovering and resilient and all these amazing things that we do and we help others do. So thank you. I want to turn it over to questions now, because I want to respect that there's a request for Q&A too. So, yeah.
Chris, that was wonderful. I'm Antia. I'm part of the substance use services team. And I think when you were mentioning kale, I was thinking of my grandfather who used to, I absolutely love kale. And for me, that's something that I would like think about as a sort of mindful chew. And my grandfather used to chew for ever. And I thought it was just very strange, and his dinners would take so long, but I realized that it was his time of reflection and his time of mindfulness. And so I'll turn to you and say that, mindfulness isn't necessarily just a tool or a thing that we do, or it's not that you have to be in a dark room in a yogic position with the lights off, right? It's really a source of happiness and freedom. And I think that's something that I never understood when I watched my grandfather chew there for minutes at a time. So I would ask you from the audience, and we only have a short period of time, but if there's any other questions in the Q&A, we have a few, is how do you find your mindful activity, or do you have to have that thing that is yours, whether it's running or chewing or tapping or breathing? what's the way to even start? You gave us a couple great examples.
I love that you brought up your grandmother, because my grandmother was also like, put your fork down between bites, chew 40 times. And actually was like writing about mindful eating. And I was like, so much of good manners is actually about mind. It's like, if you put your fork down,
That's
you're
true.
slowing down. If you chew 40 times, it's good for your digestion, and you're forced to, I mean, like, she would make me eat horrible foods, of course, my grandmother. But like, but that there is actually, it's a little bit of like, not that everything in the past was better, but it's like, when we slow down and eat, or I think about like, we used to get exercise by hunting and gathering, and now we drive and park at the gym as close as we can so that we can go on the machines. Like, we used to get mindfulness by like navigating by the stars, by looking at, the direction of the wind in the trees to predict the weather, or to see, the fish in the water. And like, now we have to like take time out to practice mindfulness.
Mm,
And I love that you're offering this, which I think is so beautiful, of like, what can it be for us? Because it's not sitting on a cushion for everybody.
mhm,
Like, and I feel so joyful that it can be movement, it can be yoga, we can bring it to running. And I know there's runners in the crowd. My friend Bob, who's a super marathoner actually, and mindfulness guy, he once asked, I think it was John Kabat-Zinn, he said, like, I'm a runner, how can I bring mindfulness to running? Like, I run, and I think John said, like, take out your earbuds and do your ultra marathon and just feel it. And he was like, oh man, that's not the answer I wanted to hear, but like, wow.
mm,
And like, what an amazing practice. But like, being in nature is so good for us. Seeing the shapes of nature, actually, those
mm,
fractal shapes actually, changes our perception, promotes creativity. Breathing that air is so good for us. Find your wonder, find your awe. It can be, for me, it's cooking. I love cooking, but slowing down, hearing the sounds, like, I can smell when it's done, not like set a timer, right? These kinds of things. Like, I was fixing something the other day, something broke in my house, and I was saying, this isn't exactly mindfulness, but it really requires like this different level of awareness. Or when I watch my kids get into their Legos, like, and I try to keep a formal sitting practice too, but I encourage people to find what they love and then bring some mindful awareness to it and get transformed. Or listen to your favorite song and notice how your body feels if you just listen to that song and do nothing else. Like, that's a really beautiful practice to do. So I think there are so many ways to explore this. I also want to, I'm very moved seeing a very old friend of my mom in the audience tonight. So I
mm.
just like, Renata, I remember going and visiting your house a few times when I was a kid, with my sister, and I think you gave me a your husband and they gave me some old snorkeling equipment, and I actually love diving. And so diving is actually when I travel for work, I now, I try to go scuba diving wherever I go. So it's sort of funny, this again, all these amazing connections of people that have these impacts on us. And it's really very moving to see you here tonight, Renata. So thank you for being here, and for your very kind words about my mom.
Well, we have such a wonderful community, and I think that's part of it, is remembering that that we can all help each other to see different ways of our sort of day-to-day lives, and how important that is. And it's so wonderful to know that Renata was here too with us. I wanted to finish, and Dr. Armstrong, if you and Alicia, if you all want to join too, is sort of come back to one thing that was brought up by an audience member, which was, in the face of all of the distress in the world, and our own chronic illness, or perhaps even our own aging and death, how do we, and tech, our cell phones that are constantly in our faces, how do we do it when really there is a lot of grief and worry that sort of, it just seems so hard to turn our minds off and to find ways to address anxiety. So when we have a lot of this anxiety, do you have any tips of sort of getting into the mindful moment when it really just seems nearly impossible?
Yeah.
Any words of wisdom?
I think I mean, I think in some ways it's less overcoming those emotions and being with them, and yet being with them is undeniably incredibly painful. Grief, loss, sadness. I mean, and fear, about the state of the world or fear about people we love and all of these things. And I think there can be some mindfulness teachers that are like, sit with it, sit through the pain. I don't think we have to spend all of our time doing that. I'm not sure if that's entirely healthy either, as we bring more mental health awareness and trauma awareness to mindfulness practice, but we can lean in and touch it and find a way to then healthfully step back out. And so learning, I think, then to be with pain, with fear, with sadness, with grief, with all of it, and yet not be consumed by it. To me, I think that's the promise, that we can feel it, and also feel that that's also in some ways the very edges of life and what's so hard that I heard, I'm paraphrasing some philosopher here, but like no tour of the universe is complete without a visit to the hell realms either. It's like there is pain in this, and that doesn't mean we have to wallow in the pain, but we can touch it, and when we touch it and when we bring mindfulness to it and compassion to ourselves in the process, I think that we can experience, I think enlightenment's a big word, but we can experience insights, we can experience wisdom coming from that, and we can bring something also truly to other people when we do that. So I know that's like a lot, it's a big question for
beautifully put, but I think that's so well said, is that we don't necessarily have to box it out, right? Is to sort of find ways of communicating with that grief or sadness in ways that we can actually find happiness. And so I want to thank you for a really beautiful evening, and I think we have to invite you back. So I want to thank the SUS Council, our Newton-Wellesley Substance Use Services Council, and I do encourage everyone to follow us on social media to learn more about the collaborative, our councils. The community programs that we're doing tonight with Dr. Willard are going to be listed on our website and updated. And really, it's about looking at what do you want to hear about and what do you want to learn, and how can you be more involved in our community programs and really just fantastic opportunities for all. So thank you for attending, and we look forward to seeing you in the future, and we wish everyone a good night. And thank you again, Dr. Willard. I'm going to take a lot of this with me just this evening right now.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Willard.
Thank you. I look forward to staying in touch. Yeah, please stay in touch. Everybody here in the audience and the five of you running the show here too. Yeah.
And we wish you all a good night, and we will send resources after the event. And Dr. Willard, if you're willing to share some or all of your slides,
Sure.
I think everyone would really like to use them as a reference. And
And
any other resources, we'll send it all by email, as well as the video of tonight's talk.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you.